Well, hello everybody. Brian Goulet here with Goulet Q&A, episode number 276 here in the beginning of December of 2019. Just finished out Thanksgiving, and today I'm going to be talking to you, among other things, about what I do with my fountain pens the most. What's kind of step one? What do you want to do right away whenever you get a new pen? And how can we objectively state whether nibs are smooth or scratchy? Where is that cutoff? So I'm going to get into it. I'm excited about today's episode. So yeah, I had the whole Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend kind of thing. Everybody's calling it Cyber Week this week. I don't know, it's very confusing because a lot of retailers are doing a lot of different things. And it's just interesting to see, to be on the kind of the retail business side of things, watching the last 10 years of how retail and just kind of e-commerce in general, especially in the United States, is kind of adapting and changing over time. So we did some different things. We had some sales that started earlier last week, and that actually worked out really well for us because we were able to spread out our own workload. We were shipping things faster. Like objectively, we measure how quickly we ship out orders. There was noticeable difference between how fast we shipped out this year versus last year because things were a little more spread out. I think a lot of retailers went that way this year just because Thanksgiving was so late. I mean, Cyber Monday was in December this year, if that tells you anything. So it was a little crazy, but our team's been pretty on top of things. This is definitely the busiest time of year for us. And then it'll get busy like maybe 2 weeks, week and a half, 2 weeks before Christmas because the delay time with shipping and stuff like that, it gets a little nuts. But anyway, that's kind of where we're at. So our headspace has definitely been in let's get stuff in, get it out to you all. And my team's really been rocking it, so I'm very excited. And things seem to run relatively smoothly on our site. There's always hiccups, there's always things going on, but nothing catastrophic has happened on our end. Monday this week, like FedEx's API was in and out and broken, and all e-commerce retailers were kind of freaking out a little bit, but thankfully didn't affect us too bad, and we're in good shape. So just lots of excitement. This is a very busy, very exciting time of year for us, both on the business, on the personal side. You know, we had Thanksgiving with Rachel's parents. They came down. My parents are in town. They came over. I ended up having my cousin, who's down in North Carolina. He came up, and just had a nice little family get together. It was kind of cool. My sister was busy with her in-law side of the family. So it was just really, really nice overall kind of deal, mixed in with a bunch of work, mixed in with all kinds of other things. And, you know, our kids are going to be having their birthdays coming up here in a few weeks and stuff like that. So it's a really crazy time for us. But if my bags under my eyes seem a little heavier right now, that's why. It's just a little crazy time for us, but it's a lot of fun. So on the video front this week, did a couple right nows, did one on Monday. It's just kind of a new product roundup. One thing that happens this time of year for us, because we're doing so much, especially with all the sales and things like that, we had all kinds of good deals that we got, a lot of which sold through for, you know, kind of the Black Weekend, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of new products that we had launched kind of got overshadowed a little bit. So trying to highlight those a little bit. You can check out that video from right now that we posted on Monday. And then Drew and I did a grab bag. So this is where Drew just randomly goes into my pen collection and pulls out some things, tries to make me remember about them, gets the backstory, and it's really interesting just because I really do have so many pens that have interesting stories that I can share. So I really enjoy those. We have to break it out every now and then. I try to plan other things, and usually when the plans fall through and we have to pull something at the last minute, that's when we do a grab bag. So a little insight for you about how the grab bag thing works. It was kind of like when we frantically have to plan it right now at the last minute, you know, trying to come up with 2 every single week when there's holidays and all kinds of other things, it can be a challenge with everything else we're trying to do in the business. But anyway, it's a lot of fun. So don't have a whole lot of new products to talk about here for you today. You can check out the right now if you want to get a lot of what has been launched so far. So I'm going to get right into the questions, if that's cool with you. One of the shorter intros I've done, under 5 minutes. Let's keep rolling. All right, pen and writing questions for this week. Christian Prentice 93 on Instagram says, what is the thing that you do most with your fountain pens? Do you have a favorite activity involving your pens, like journaling, calligraphy, etc.? You know, me personally, I've kind of touched on this here and there, but I like the way this question was phrased. For me, it's a little bit different. You know, I'm a pen reviewer. I'm running a pen company. So it's probably going to be a little bit different for me than maybe for other people. But if I had to kind of lump it all into one category of things I do the most with my pens, it would probably be I reference them. You know, I catalog pens. I have a collection of 900 or so of various things. I actually have been working recently to catalog all of the exclusives that we've ever done, because it's quite a few. You know, looking at the various colors, models, things that, not even breaking down nib sizes, but just models and colors of exclusives. It's over 100 pens that we've done as Goulet exclusives. So that's pretty cool. That's not even counting the pens I made back in the day. I'm talking just other companies' pens that we have done as exclusives. So yeah, it's a lot. And I keep one of each of those. So, you know, for me personally, I think, you know, I'm very tactile. My memory is very tactile. So when I'm touching pens, especially, you know, pens that have a story to them, that have some sort of emotional tie, which a lot of them do, because so much of my life is this business. So much of my life is told through the things that we decide to do in this business. So I have a lot of memories tied to these pens. And so when I am kind of just going through my pens, sometimes I'll literally just have some spare moments, and I'll just kind of go through my pens for a few minutes and just kind of pick them up and relive all these memories. It's really interesting, just the way my brain works like that. But so yeah, I do that a lot. You know, obviously I write with them. That's that's part of what they're for. I admire them. I have pens basically all over my desk at all times. I easily have 15 to 20 pens within eye shot at all times, and I carry at least 20 of them around with me in my bag as I'm going everywhere. So I definitely admire them as the works of art that they are. But when I'm actually writing with them, which is, you know, what you do with pens, generally speaking, most of the time for me it's quick notes. You know, I'm a busy person. I have 2 kids and you know, the whole business and everything. I'm in a lot of different types of meetings. A lot of the meetings that I'm in, notes are digitized, but some of them, especially the more personal ones, I will often take handwritten notes. And it's nothing elaborate. You know, I'm really a terrible multitasker. So if I'm taking elaborate notes, I'm not hearing what's being said in a meeting. That's why usually the quicker it is, it's usually bullet points and line items and 1 or 2 sentences at a time. That tends to be more how I'm actually using my pens. So I'm uncapping and capping pens a lot, writing quick notes, capping it again, paying attention for 3 minutes, write another note down. So it's a lot of just quick hits like that. That's kind of more how I'm kind of practically using my pens. And then I do some journaling at home, not as much. I've kind of fallen off that wagon recently. I've just been so busy, so tired. You know, I keep a journal by my nightstand, and even though it's some lines a day that I've been doing for like 3.5 years, I really have fallen off the wagon for the last several months, because it's just about the last thing I want to do by the time I actually make it upstairs and make it to my bed, is pull out my pen and write something, because I'm usually I'm done. I'm exhausted, I'm depleted. I've left it all on the field for the day. But anyway, so I have done that historically, but even then it's usually not lengthy writing. So that's just my own style, you know. But for me, I think, you know, the referencing, pulling them out, comparing them, I love taking them apart. I actually really love cleaning my pens. You know, I don't love starting cleaning my pens, if that makes sense. So if I have like 10 pens I need to clean, it's like, oh, I gotta clean these pens, man. But usually once I sit down and I actually start doing it, I really, really love it. I kind of forget how much I love it until I'm actually doing it again. You know what I mean? It's like there's a hurdle I have to get over. Once I do it, I'm like, I'm pulling them apart, taking them out, cleaning them out, and I just kind of get in that zone. But it's just a hurdle. I'm pretty much that way with cleaning anything, but in general, that's kind of how I'm doing it. So, you know, obviously, the more I'm playing with the pens, the more I know them, I can talk about them, I can share them. That's really what I love doing. I'm not writing novels with pens every day, and I think that that's okay. That's just how I end up using it. So there you go. That's just my own little insight. Mind the body NL on Instagram. I have a Platinum 3776. I really like this question, but it's long. I have a Platinum 3776. I have been considering expanding my gold nib fountain pen collection by getting a Lamy 2000 or a Pilot Vanishing Point, but later realized that getting one of these pens would not necessarily widen my collection in terms of writing experience that much, perhaps given that all 3 of them have relatively stiff gold nibs. What would be the options you'd recommend for a relatively affordable gold nib pen that has more flexible nib than the Platinum 3776? So, or like the Lamy 2000 or Vanishing Point. Okay, great question. I love this one because it really speaks to kind of the way that I like to expand my pen experience as I acquire pens. I really don't consider myself a collector so much as I am an acquirer or a hoarder. But the thing is, it is helpful to have like a variety of experience. I will start off by saying that the Lamy 2000 and the Pilot Vanishing Point are two of, I think, the best kind of affordable gold nib pens that are made, maybe ever. So they are great, great, great fountain pens. Ever a lot. Okay, so maybe I shouldn't go quite that far to say that, but certainly made in modern time, right? So love these pens. You really can't go wrong. They are very different than a 3776 in many other ways. And so I would say don't write these off, no pun intended, as pens that are worth kind of experiencing if you really are enjoying the hobby and you want to round out that experience of kind of these gold nibs. Both of these are worth having, as well as a 3776. I say this very objectively. But they're great pens for a lot of different reasons. However, that said, you are pretty correct in that they're relatively stiff gold nibs. They're not going to give you a very soft, very springy kind of writing experience like you might get with some other gold nibs. So that's part of why I wanted to take this question, because this question is more of kind of a deep track. It's like you're getting really specific into some aspects of these pens, and I like that. So we're going to go there. So rock solid Lamy 2000 and Vanishing Point. This is the Twilight, by the way, the limited edition from 2016. That was just amazing. 2016 or 2015? Wow, 2015? Oh my gosh, that was a while ago. That was 4 years ago? Man, getting old. I'm kidding, but kind of not. Okay, so 3776, the one I'm holding in my hand here, this is the Carnelian. This is the new US exclusive, first US exclusive 3776 that's ever been done. So it's a nice kind of orangish red with some sparkles to it. Pretty cool. Actually, the price just dropped on these. There was a fixed price at full MSRP of these in the US, and it just dropped to 20% off. So you're probably going to see that pretty much everywhere from retailers in the US, us included. So $192 now for this pen. So much more affordable and closer to the other 3776s, which is cool to see. So if you previously had it but you were thinking it was too expensive, know that the price just dropped. Anyway, all that to say, the reason I bring this one up is because the one that I selected for myself, I mean, I literally went through this thought process when I was getting the Carnelian because I chose the one with the soft, fine nib, right? So first thing, you already have a 3776, not trying to urge you to get another one necessarily, but every now and then they will have a soft fine or a soft medium on the platinum pens, on some of the pens. So you may be able to check those out. Those are going to be a different writing experience. They're going to be a little springier. Smoothness is going to be relatively similar, but it is going to feel perhaps a little smoother because of that bounce. So if you don't already have a 3776, or if you have one, you love the pen, but you just wanted a different maybe writing experience, the soft fine or the soft medium nib will give you some of that, right? So if you're looking for a different color of a pen that you already know you love, try out the soft nibs, because I do think it's worth it. It's not necessarily that it gives you like huge line variation. It's not a flex nib, but it is going to be springier like a more conventional, whatever that means, gold nib that may be softer on some other pens that I'm going to be talking about forthcoming, right? So that's one thing you can consider, soft nib. Other Japanese companies, Sailor, Pilot, may have soft nibs here and there. Pilot more, I'm less familiar with Sailor. But in general, those nibs all tend to be maybe a little bit stiffer on some of them, but Pilot I know has soft nibs on some of their pens. Not so much offered in the US, but more so in Japan. So you'll see them every now and then. But Pilot's nibs in general tend to be a little softer, and I'm going to get into those right now because I pulled several of them. So one of the first gold nib pen that I ever had was actually this exact one. This is the Custom 74. This is a medium nib. And this one, these are, still 14 karat gold nibs, which is what you're getting on the 3776. However, I guess it has to do with the design of the nib, the thickness of the gold, even though it's the same carat rating of the gold. The higher the carat rating, the softer the gold is. Don't know if you knew that, but that's a thing. Whatever it is about the way they design these things, you know, whether it's the cut, the taper of the nib, or the thickness of the metal, or whatever it is. This definitely is a springier nib. Like, I think this is more what I would call kind of traditionally what you would expect when going to a gold nib. It's going to feel very different than a steel nib, especially if you're coming, like, comparing with Pilot, maybe a Metropolitan, Pilot Knight, Prera. That's what I'm thinking of. I kept wanting to say Preppy, and I want to say Plaisir. I was like, that's Platinum. Prera, that's what Pilot. So any of those nibs, you're going to feel a difference definitely when you go up to a Custom 74. So this one, certainly a contender. It was my first gold nib pen, and I really loved it. And it was, you know, it's sentimental to me, obviously, because it was my first one, but it also was kind of in that aha kind of experience for me. I didn't have a lot of experience with gold nib pens, and this one to me was like, oh, I now see what people have been talking about on the forums and other things. It's hard to explain exactly how it feels different, you know, other than it's springy and stuff like that. But when you're actually writing with it and feeling with it, you're like, oh yeah, this is a different experience. So 37 or so the Custom 74, definitely a worthy contender. Another good platinum one. This has been around for a long time. And has been known really for their soft nibs, is the Pilot Falcon. Formerly the Miki Falcon, but they changed the name to Pilot several years ago. It's got a unique design on its nib, and the reason they call it the Falcon is because literally the thing looks like the beak of a falcon, right? So it's got a little bend to it. Part of the reason it has that bend and that shape is because it's meant to actually, well, it's soft, so it's meant to kind of reinforce the nib a little bit. So if you give it some pressure, the tines, I hate to call it flex because it's not that dramatic, but you can get some line variation with this nib. Pilot makes a regular version of the Falcon, and they make a soft version. The soft version is the only one that we have here in the US, which is fine because that's really what you want anyway. So you don't have to flex it out and all that, but this is going to be one of the softer nibs you're going to get. So it's going to be a very soft writing experience. Pen is very light, and it's a really solid writer. So this one has a very, very solid reputation for being a great writing, very soft gold nib, and it's also on that affordable side too. So I would give the Falcon a look for sure. Another one that is, you know, not like widely popular, but I think it's a super cool pen, and it's I think gained some popularity in the last couple of years. This is the Pilot E95S. I believe it's known as the Elite in Japan. And this one has an inlaid gold nib, which is stylistically very cool. So again, this is another 14 karat gold nib, but this one I feel is also very soft. I feel like this one is maybe not quite as soft as the Falcon, maybe between the Custom 74 and the Falcon. So this one has got some good softness to it. You can get a little bit of line variation. I chose the extra fine for myself because I can get some of that line variation. It's a very light pen, but very smooth writer, very soft nib, and also in that entry-level price point. So all of these I think are really, really good contenders. Also the way that this pen caps is so smooth. It just like glides on off the pen, and it's kind of a smaller pocket pen. Looks very vintagey. It's a cool pen. It's a really cool pen. So E95S doesn't always get mentioned first when kind of in this category, but certainly worthy. Of course, I didn't mention it first, so there you go. I'm doing the same thing everybody else is doing. Another one that's worth mentioning, so this is Lamy. Now you mentioned the Lamy 2000. Lamy in their conventional nib lineup, I guess, their swappable nib lineup. The 2000 is a different nib than basically all their other pens. All the other ones have the kind of swappable standard shape Lamy nib. They do make some of their pens, some of them, the Studios, CP1s, the Dialogue 3, Scala, not all of them, but some of them do come with 14 karat gold nibs instead of the standard steel nibs. Similar design. It is a two-tone, so it's like a rhodium plated, or maybe it's platinum plated, I can't remember, with a kind of a gold little stripe in the middle there. So it looks really cool. But man, these nibs are smooth, very bouncy. The flow is wetter on these than it is on the Lamy steel nibs. And it's an entirely different, the grind is different and everything. It's really not the same at all as a Lamy 2000, even though the Lamy 2000 is also a 14 karat Lamy nib technically. Design is completely different, and the feel is very, very different on these nibs than on the 2000. So again, you can get this nib On a number of different Lamy pens, you can also pull this nib off and you can put it on basically whatever Lamy pen besides the 2000 that you'd want. And then you can actually buy the nibs separately. That has not always been a thing. We've stocked them and very inconsistently because we're beholden to the supply of them. However, it is possible to get them on their own. So if you wanted to put it on your Lamy Safari, you could technically do that and get a pretty great writing experience. So I really love these Lamy 14 karat nibs, and that's a good one. And then I have the Dialogue 3 here as well. The Dialogue 3 gets a little bit outside of the entry-level gold nib range, but it's just a really cool pen, and I wanted to show you if you weren't familiar with it. I didn't have one of these for a number of years. We carried them for a while. We dropped them for a while. We brought them back, and when we brought them back, I was like, yeah, I need to have one of these, because I always regretted not keeping one when we had one prior. Anyway, very cool pen. Not a lot of retractable nib fountain pens out there, and the Lamy one, this is kind of a feat of engineering. It's very cool. Anyway, so this one's a little more expensive, more in the $300 range, but same nib as what you would have on some of those other Lamy gold nib pens. Very cool. All right, so that gives you a decent kind of assortment of pens that you can look into. All of these, with the exception of the Dialogue 3, can be found in that like sub $200 range. So I think a lot of good things for you to consider there. Honestly, I mean, all of these pens I pulled out of my personal collection because I love all of them that much, and most of them I have in multiple colors too. So all very worthy considerations. I'm glad you asked that question. All right, Kimiko C on Facebook says, what is step one when receiving a new pen? Flushing the entire nib? With what? I read there can be residual oils left on them? Exclamation point, question mark. Do I have to let it dry for 24 hours? So Kimiko, I can tell you're distraught in your series of questions here. So this is like a 5-in-1 question here, but I think I can encompass all of this, and it actually leads nicely into my next question, talking about just pen cleaning and all that. I like taking these kind of questions because honestly it keeps me rooted. I've acquired, clearly, in my whole collection, many new pens. So I've gone through this process quite a few times. And I know, just putting on my authorized retailer hat, what's recommended from the manufacturer, and then I'll talk about what I actually do with my own pens. It doesn't deviate a whole lot, but still. So yes, I think, when you're getting a new pen, step one is to make sure that you got the right stuff. If you're ordering it online, it's different I guess if you're in a brick and mortar store or if you're at a pen show or something like that, you physically have the pen in your hands and you just know that it's the right thing. But make sure that you have all the components with it, converter, everything that's supposed to be included. Make sure you have all the stuff that's supposed to be included with the pen. Because sometimes crazy things happen. Converter might be missing. There might be something crazy that goes on, and you just want to make sure that it's right. Or if you're ordering from a store like ours, just make sure that you actually got what you ordered. That the wrong thing wasn't accidentally shipped in the package. You didn't actually get somebody else's package. It's not often that kind of stuff happens, at least from our store. I would assume most everybody else's too, but crazy things can happen sometimes. So it's a good idea just to verify that you got the right stuff in your order. I think giving it a quick visual inspection. So you take your pen, you pull it out of the box, you just look at it, cap it, uncap it, just make sure that it looks good. Kind of look at the nib, make sure that it's not wonky or anything. I would love to say that we go over every single pen with a fine-tooth comb. It's just not practical for us to do that with most pens. And a lot of times that comes from the manufacturer. They come packaged as they are. For example, we get a pen from Retro 51, Santa Jaws. It's sealed in plastic, so we're not going to unseal it and inspect everything. It's not always practical for us to do that. So, you just want to verify, does it look like it should? It's not a bad idea with any new product you buy from anything. When you unbox it, okay, you want to make sure that it looks like it should, right? You may not know to the nth degree of all the details, but is it meeting your expectations? Does it have all its parts? That kind of stuff. Just give it a quick visual inspection. Not anything crazy, but just make sure that, sometimes we'll inspect stuff even, and, in transit in the box, it rattles around or it does something crazy. We've had sometimes, pens that have been in a limited edition kind of thing, and usually you want things to be addressed, but Sometimes we've had things where the packaging itself is not set up for pens to be shipped very far. Sometimes they're more of like presentation, meant to be displayed in a store kind of thing, but when you ship it, the cap comes off the pen and it rattles around and hits the pen, and crazy things can happen sometimes. We've had that happen with like past limited edition things, and so usually we'll try to look out for that, put in some layers of bubble wrap or something, but still, you never know. So give it a quick inspection. I think basically every pen manufacturer will recommend, and I as an authorized retailer will tell you, it's a good idea to clean the pen before you actually ink it up for the first time. You know, you mentioned in here the residual oils. What is that all about? So there can be, I guess, you know, it's not always the case. It's not like there's oils dripping out of your pen. But, you know, anything new that's manufactured, it's not a bad idea to clean it before you use it. You know, it's just like if you buy a new set of silverware or dishware or whatever, you know, you pull it out of the box, go ahead and clean it. There's just stuff in the packaging, there's stuff in the manufacturing process, leftover, you know, dust or you know, just manufacturing residue, oils, whatever it might be. You know, sometimes there's stuff that's called swarf. If you have a resin pen, you know, there could be, you know, just little pieces of the plastic or pieces of whatever that's in there that's, you know, left over from the manufacturing process. I've toured several different pen factories, and basically all of them have some process in there where they're cleaning the pen. So it's not like they manufacture the pen and don't wipe it off and shove it in the box and there's all this garbage all over it. You know, but certainly with any process that's in manufacturing, there's QC steps, there's cleaning steps, but it may not get absolutely everything, right? So, you know, for me, I think it's always recommended to clean your pen first, but then this is also where I have to put on my, like, not a retailer, but a pen user hat. I am honestly usually so excited to use a pen when I get it. It's rare that I will actually go and clean it before I ink it up and use it. I'm just being honest with you, just being vulnerable, showing up and letting myself be seen, as Brene Brown would say. I don't always practice what I preach there, partly because I'm so excited, and partly because our pen cleaning station is at the opposite end of the building from my office, so I usually don't have the patience to go down there and clean it before I ink it up for the first time. Now that said, I will write with it, and if it's not writing as I feel it should, then I will clean it immediately. But half the time I'm just inking it up and going nuts because I'm so pumped for my new pen. So not a bad idea. Yes, if you want to be like by the books, go ahead and clean it first. You don't need to clean it elaborately. Just flush it with water. Or if you want to do water with a little bit of dish soap in it, just a little bit of surfactant in there to help move out if there are any oils in there left over in the manufacturing process, great. That'll really help move those along. If you do use anything with a cleaning solution like a pen flush or a dish soap or something like that, clean it with clean water before you ink it up in the pen. But you definitely do not need to let it dry for 24 hours if you're going to be inking it. You know, for me, I think too many people are letting their pens fully dry before they ink them up again. Because honestly, if you're inking up your pen, you're getting it wet again. Water is a huge component of ink. So if you have water in the pen and you ink it up, you know, you're putting water back in it. So I don't think that it's necessary to let it dry out, but that's totally up to you. If you feel more comfortable and you like, no, I must maintain the integrity of the ink, it must be completely dry, look, that's cool. You do whatever makes you happy, but I don't do that. I will let my pens completely dry out if I know that I'm not going to be using them for a while and I'm going to be storing them away. That's when I will let them fully dry out. But if you're going to be inking them up, especially in the prepping them for the first time, you don't need to let them dry out. What little bit of water, you want to try and get out as much water as you can. And the tip that I usually use when I'm inking a pen for the first time, if it is cleaned, or just even after it's been cleaned, not even using it for the first time, but you know, I'll flush it out, I'll make sure there's no water in the converter or the piston or whatever it is, and then there's usually water left over in the feed, so I'll take a paper towel and I'll wrap it around it, leave it on there for a good 10 or 20 seconds, move it to a different place on the towel, try and soak up all that extra water out of the feed, because that's really where most of that water is going to be. And then whatever little tiny little drips are elsewhere inside the converter or whatever, I don't sweat it. That's going to mix with the ink when you ink up the pen. It's going to be such a minute amount of water that's going to be left in there. It's not going to dilute your ink. You're really not going to be able to tell a difference one way or the other. So don't wait 24 hours, just ink your pen up, is what I say. So yes, let's see here. Once you ink it up, then, you know, it may take a little bit, especially if you have a pen with an ebonite feed, which is not a lot of pens, but, you know, especially if you have one there, it can take a little bit for the ink to really saturate. Even if you fill the pen, you think like, oh, I've filled the pen, so the pen must be full and ready to write right away. It's not always 100% the case, because usually pens will have a different hole where they fill from. They're not filling from the tip of the nib. They're usually filling from up near the collar where the grip is. So if you're filling it and you're like me and you're really excited, you can fill it quickly. There's ink inside the reservoir. I'll go ahead and open up the pen so you can see the reservoir. In this case, it's a converter. It could be an ink cartridge, it could be whatever. But if your whole feed is dry, you fill it through the filler hole really quickly, and then you go to write with it. The ink may not have naturally kind of worked its way down into the other side of the feed, because you're filling it from the underside of the feed, and it needs to, if you pull this thing out here, I got this pen inked up, but let me see if I have an uninked pen where I can show you kind of what's going on. Dang, all my pens might be inked. Oh, no, I've got some here. I'll use my Custom 74. Okay, so like this pen, for example, if I pull this out, ta-da, so my feed. So when I'm filling it, see if I can get close enough where you can actually see what's going on. When I'm filling it, there's this channel right here on the underside. So that's where it's filling. Well, actually, this is a terrible example because this feed is kind of special. This feed is unique in that the filler hole is actually right here on the underside of the feed, and it kind of fills through it. But either way, you get the idea. It fills on the underside, and then the ink, when it's writing, is actually coming through the other side. So all this to say, when you fill the pen, it may or may not be ready to write that immediate second once it's been inked. It may take 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, maybe a minute, especially if it's ebonite and the capillary action really needs to work. The ebonite is a hygroscopic material, which means that it is kind of absorbent, which is great because it actually assists in the capillary action of the ink. So it helps it to write more reliably, but it does take it a second to get primed. So it's got to kind of soak into the feed a little bit to really get moving. Whereas a plastic feed is not really doing that. It's just kind of moving through. It's more the engineering and the size of the feed channels that's assisting in that capillary action. Still reliable, but it's just a little bit different. Ebonite feeds tend to be a little wider, a little more open because this is different engineering. So all that to say, give it a few seconds. You can maybe assist it if you have a converter. You can let the ink down a little bit, or a piston even. You can let the ink down. You can just push it down a tiny little bit to help assist it down through. Even then, if you like really force it through, really what you're doing is you're just pushing it back out of where you filled it from, which is not the other side. So you can do it very gently, can assist. Or what I like to do is just use whatever towel that you might be using to wipe off your nib. You can just kind of do that. I'm trying to show you. You can just kind of like wipe it on here and assist it on the top side of it. And then that can help just assist the flow through the pen as you're first inking it up. And then you flip it over and then just kind of drag the tip of the nib across. And when you get a nice consistent dark line like that, then you know you're ready to write. And you can pretty much be ready to go. So that's a really good way to kind of make sure that you're primed up and ready to go. I don't recommend tapping it on the paper. I admittedly did that in my earliest days ignorantly, but it's not good because essentially you could tap it too hard, you can damage the nib. You don't really want to do that. One thing you can do, this is if you're brave enough, hold on to the pen. You can do what's called shake it down. So you just kind of like you're just holding it in your hand, and you're kind of like shaking it and stopping it kind of suddenly on your own. You can also do this by like putting your hand, you can't really see all the way down this far because it's out of the frame, but if you put your hand on the table and you kind of tap one hand onto the other, that will keep you from accidentally smashing your nib into the paper. That's the risk you take there. Or the other thing that can happen if you're doing this process is the pen can slip out of your hand and be like torpedo out and smash the nib into the thing, and then it rolls onto the floor, and then you have to walk uphill both ways in the snow, and life is hard, right? So You don't necessarily want to do that unless you're willing to take that risk, but that is a process. Just letting you know, that is something that can help the ink just kind of force through. What else? Also, you can fling ink everywhere when you're tapping it like that. If the feed's really open, and it can get drips everywhere. So definitely do that one with caution. But yeah, I think that will pretty much get you going. I mean, everything I've explained there, you're going to be in really good shape. All right, Amy A on Facebook says, as a person fairly new to the fountain pen world, I said this would segue, I find myself extra anxious about the cycle of filling the pen and cleaning it. Any advice on how to get over this anxiety or fear? Well, Amy, I hope you just watched the question that I posted from Kimiko, explaining kind of what do you do when setting up a pen. I think part of that is if you're going through the proper steps, that really helps to eliminate some of the anxieties because you know what you're doing, you're feeling in control of your pen and all that. I think, you know, knowledge is power. Educating yourself about how the pens work, how to clean them, how to fill them, all that really helps to eliminate and dispel kind of a lot of the fear and anxiety you might feel around these pens. And I do understand it because some of these pens, they can get rather expensive. You know, you get to, I don't know, up into the range of like a Homo sapiens or, you know, even a Dialogue 3 or a Pelikan M800 or something like that. You're getting into the hundreds of dollars on these pens. You don't want to screw it up. Like, I totally get it. And you're investing a lot of money in this. You're investing your time and energy into these pens. You don't want to do something wrong. Everybody's going to have a different, you know, comfort level when it comes to doing these processes with these pens. But I do want to just reassure you that this is something that everyone who's using fountain pens is doing. So we all share in a little bit of that feeling at the same time. This is the process for how fountain pens work. So you can kind of, I guess, be assured that if it was really a problem and people were screwing up their pens all the time, you would be hearing about it all the time because, I mean, literally every single day, people are inking up and cleaning out tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of pens. So it kind of normalizes it a little bit, right? I think, you know, watching, you know, videos, we have a Fountain Pen 101 pen maintenance video on the cleaning side of things. There's a lot of other videos, tips and tricks and stuff like that about how to do it. I think cleaning them, personally, I think cleaning them is a great process for getting to know your pens a little better. It can be a little bit kind of anxiety inducing cleaning them, especially if you're by the sink, you're worried about dropping a part down the sink. So one thing that I did to help me with that is I got one of those like sink strainers, you know, the like mesh ones that like you won't drop anything down that because it's very, very, very fine. So I actually put that in my sink when I go to clean my pens, just so that I don't have to worry about it. I can drop a part, I can drop an O-ring or whatever, and it's not going to go anywhere. So that's one thing you can do. Tools for your tool belt. You know, I think really unless you're doing something crazy, you're not going to do anything that hurts your pen in the process of filling it or cleaning it. I think if you're cleaning it, you don't want to be haphazard. You don't want to completely disassemble. You know, you don't want to take apart parts that you're not supposed to. But that's where watching tutorials, that's where reaching out to our team, like for the pens that we sell, we can usually say, give you some good advice about what's good to disassemble, what's not. Granted, most manufacturers are going to say don't like fully disassemble your pens. That's fine. You don't have to do that to clean them or fill them, but I like to do it just because it helps me to get to know them better. But then again, I'm shooting these videos and stuff, so I probably need to know a little deeper what works and what doesn't than probably your average pen enthusiast does. And then I think honestly, just doing it. You know, they're pens, they're physical objects, they don't have feelings. You know, they are in large part replaceable physical objects, you know, so you're not going to do anything unless you have some particularly sentimental, irreplaceable thing that was passed down through your family or something like that. You know, largely these are just physical objects that are meant to be handled. They're designed to last decades. So I doubt there's anything that you're going to do unless you're particularly careless or aggressive or trying to do something that is just really not a wise idea. I think in generally speaking, if you're going through kind of the normal process of what we talk about in cleaning and filling a pen, then really it's just a matter of getting comfortable doing it and practicing and doing it a bunch of times. So some of it is you just got to kind of take that leap, jump in, do it. You do it a few times, clean it out, and the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get. So I think that's the moral of the story is just kind of dive in, give it a shot, and then you know, arm yourself with knowledge, and worst case, reach out to our team and we'll help get you there. All right, Rung W on Facebook says, what are the pros and cons of heavy versus lightweight pens? And why might a person prefer one over another? I think this is an interesting question. It's definitely a personal thing, very much a personal preference. I can't say there's one, at this gram weight, a pen is perfectly weighted. This one's too light, this one's too heavy. It's very different for everybody. And it's not going to be set in stone. Even the pros and cons I'm going to talk about are completely subjective and are up for debate. But I will give my best summations here of what I think based on my own experiences and what I've heard other people talking about with these pens. So that is kind of where I'll start out, right? So heavier pens, right? So I'm going to use an example of a heavier pen, the Diplomat Aero. So this pen, I forget the gram weight of this pen off the top of my head. I could probably look it up real quick. I literally just grabbed this one, or Homo sapiens, anything kind of in this range. These are slightly heavier pens, but I'll use the Aero because it's metal. Overall weight, 41 grams. I think I would feel comfortable saying a 41 gram pen would be considered a heavy pen. I don't know exactly where the cutoff is, but probably somewhere around 30 grams, maybe. I don't know. That's very subjective. But this is 41. That's pretty clearly in the heavier pen camp. So we'll call that our heavy pen. And then our light pen, I'll call our Pilot Falcon, right? And this one, I really should have looked up either of these pens. 19 grams. Okay, 19 grams, pretty definitively a light pen, right? Not the lightest, but on the light side. Okay, that said, we have our heavy pen, we have our light pen. So I think, bigger pens are usually heavier. So bigger pens, it's not always the case, but generally speaking, the larger the pen is, the more material is there. So it's going to tend to be maybe a little bit heavier. I think bigger pens are better for people with bigger hands, Not always the case. Again, it's completely subjective. But, generally speaking, if you have bigger hands, you're going to be more comfortable using a bigger, heavier pen than maybe somebody with smaller hands. I think it feels more different than normal pens. When I say normal pens, I should really qualify that with, people such as myself who did not grow up using fountain pens, generally are using, rollerball pens, like the Pilot G2, relatively thin, relatively light. Let me see if I have any other examples. I don't really have a lot of great examples at the ready. I'm looking for like a Bic Crystal or something like that. Anyway, you might use a number 2 pencil. The writing implements that you may grow up with are relatively light. So when you get into fountain pen territory, a 41 gram pen is like, I've never written with anything this heavy in my life. And that just feels different, right? So I think that's one thing about heavier pens is they feel different than maybe pens that you grew up with, if you didn't grow up with fountain pens. I think that some people, especially in certain cultures, the US is certainly this case, tend to associate weight and size with higher quality. So meaning the bigger and heavier something is, the more appealing it is. I mean, just look at the cars that we drive here, right? The bigger and heavier something is, generally speaking, the more quality. There's kind of an inverse relationship like that when it comes to electronics and things like that. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. We're talking about pens. It's not a steadfast rule, but I do generally think that when people feel a heavier pen, you're kind of like, oh yeah, like this is sturdy, there's a lot to it. I feel like I'm really kind of getting my money's worth with the per gram weight of the pen, and that's just kind of a general thing. Super cultural, right? Like it's very different in other places. Like Japan, they don't want really heavy pens. They like lighter pens. They associate lighter, streamlined, simpler. They equate that with higher quality, right? So it's going to be very different, but that can certainly be a factor, that the weight of the pen can be associated with quality in whatever degree. I think that when you have heavier pens, generally speaking, they can be made out of materials like metal, stone, volcanic rock. These things might be a little more durable, right? So these materials, generally speaking, the more durable materials might be a little heavier. They might be in bigger pens, so there could be a durability aspect to larger pens. And then this is very, very subjective. And I'm thinking about this because the last question I have in Q&A talks about nib smoothness and nib feel. But I feel like there's probably just some elements of the fact that when you have a heavier pen, it can maybe make the nib feel a little bit smoother. I really haven't like tested this very scientifically. This is really just off the top of my head and kind of an assumption based on my own experiences, but I feel like the heavier a pen is, the more it can kind of absorb some of the vibration that may happen due to the friction of a nib on page, and that can make it just feel, it may not actually be smoother, but you might feel less of the nib friction on the page with a heavier pen. I don't know, do y'all feel like that? I was really thinking about this with Q&A this week specifically, and I was like, I feel like that's the case, but I may need to go back and revisit some of them, especially if I have a pen that has the exact same nib on it. Like for example, if I have a Homo sapiens or something like a Visconti that has the exact same nib, but it's like the resin version versus like the volcanic rock version, or I have like the Opera Master, which is heavy, it's like 60 some grams, versus even a Homo sapiens around, you know, whatever, 37 or 40 or whatever it is. You know, is that nib gonna feel smoother on the heavier pen? I feel like it does, but I need to think about that some more, but there could be something to that. Anyway, I'll just kind of plant that seed, let y'all see what you think. Lighter pens are good, I think, generally speaking. Maybe they feel more familiar. Maybe they feel like the pens that you've used, you know, before. A bigger pen might feel just like, you may just notice it more in your hand, and that might not be appealing. Maybe it is appealing, maybe it's not. It might feel more like a foreign object, whereas a lighter pen could feel more like an extension of your hand. I could totally see that being a good argument. I think, generally speaking, the biggest appeal for lighter pens has to do with when you're actually writing with them, it's less fatiguing for your hand. So you don't have to, you know, you don't get weighed down as much, especially if you're writing for long writing sessions. I think that your hand is going to get less tired because you're just not having to hold up as much. It's like if you go hiking, you want to carry the lightest backpack that you can because you're not going to get tired as quickly. Same kind of experience, same kind of deal here. So that for sure, I think, is the overwhelming reason why people like lighter fountain pens. I think that, you know, if you're carrying your pen around and you have it like clipped into a pocket, or maybe you have it like you're carrying around a notebook and you have it clipped into maybe a pen loop, or, you know, clipped inside a notebook or something. If a pen is lighter, it's less likely to kind of like fling out of the whatever the object is, or maybe way down in your pocket. I know certainly when I'm carrying around a real heavy pen and it's clipped onto something, you know, if you have like a nice dress shirt and you have a real heavy pen, it can kind of like sag more, or if you move real quickly, it has more momentum behind it when you're moving, so it can fling itself out. Lighter pens will kind of stay in place. It's not the only factor. The clip strength and all kinds of other things can be a factor, but I do feel like the lighter pens are less noticeable when you're carrying them around and they stay more in place. You know, I think this is also very subjective and it depends on the design of the pen, but I feel like lighter caps are less likely like fling off if you, like me, if you like to gesticulate, use your hands a lot when you talk, and you're in meetings and stuff and you're kind of just moving your hands around a lot. If you have a heavier cap that you're kind of flinging around, it's maybe more likely to fall off, or at least it's going to throw off the balance of the pen a little bit more. I think if you have a lighter pen, you can post it and write with it pretty much whatever length that it is, and it's still going to feel a little more comfortable. So that's a pro kind of lighter pen there. And then it's easier to carry around kind of in large numbers. If you're like me and you like to carry around like a 20 pen case or something with a whole bunch of different pens in it, if it's all weighed down with, you know, really heavy pens, it's going to add some pretty meaningful weight when you get into the 20 times pens, versus if you have a bunch of lighter pens, it's going to be less to carry around, right? So that's another thing. So I think that you could argue for or against kind of any of these points that I brought up, but really the bottom line is that it's incredibly subjective. It's really up to personal preference, and there could be pros and cons either way. Me personally, I have pens in all ranges of sizes, but I will definitely kind of pick and choose how I choose to use a pen, somewhat based on its weight, so it does matter. All right, got an ink question. This is from Caroline F on Facebook. Tell me about options for a red shimmer ink. There are a handful on Goulet, and I'd love to know which one you like best. There are a handful, not a ton of them, but there's a few. Honestly, if you go to our website and you see under the top navigation on our website, you can click on ink, and there's actually a category there for shimmering ink. So you can click on that. You go over to the left side, your left side, and you can see that there's a filter for red, right? So you just click on the red dot. That's gonna, you're already in the shimmering category, and you click on red. That's gonna give you all of the red shimmering options that we have. And it's not a ton of them, it's less than 10, right? So I'm gonna give you kind of my top 3. And largely it's the ones that if you look at, if it's the default, I think, is sorted by popularity, and it's the most popular ones. So I'm kind of just gonna regurgitate what our website has, but I'll give you my subjective opinion based on my experience with them. My personal favorite red shimmer ink, part of this might just be nostalgic, but it's the Jacques Herbin 1670 Rouge Hematite. Great, it's a great ink, very, I mean, we're coming on to the, whatever, holiday season, Christmas season. I think red with like a gold glitter in it. Very, very much that way. And there's a little bit of a green sheen to Rouge Hematite as well. So it's like, really, if you're talking like Christmas ink, Christmas card ink, like that one's pretty tough to beat. So that one's really good. It was like the OG shimmering ink, right? Like it was one of the first, I think maybe the first that I was aware of anyway. But certainly that really helped to kick it off in the pen world, in the ink world. So really, it's very classic, and it's a really cool ink. It can tend to crust up a little bit on the nib. I think this is not uncommon for like reds and oranges to when they dry, they kind of crust up a little bit. You just wash it off, wipe it off, and it goes right away. But just don't be shocked if that does happen. Another good one is Diamine Red Luster. That one's really up there in popularity too. It's a red with a gold shimmer, not quite as intense as Rouge Hematite. Doesn't have as heavy of a sheen. It's more of just a pure kind of red with a gold glitter in it. So that one's really cool. And then Diamine Wine Divine. So that's a little more of a burgundy color if you're going not so much for like a bright red, but a little more subtle of a maroon kind of type of color. That one could be there. It's got a gold sheen as well. Pretty much all the red shimmering inks that we have gold sheens. So there's definitely some others on our site, but these are some of the ones. And I think, you know, just given the time of year that we're in, this question could have come up because you're looking to write holiday cards and these types of things. The one thing I will say in general, not just specifically with reds, but in general with shimmering ink, specifically if you're trying to use them on cards, cardstock, the amount of shimmer that you'll get or that will appear drastically is affected by the absorbency of the paper that you're writing on. And this can really, really vary a lot with cardstock. So like whatever holiday cards or whatever things you're writing on, certain cards you can have like no shimmer whatsoever. Not uncommon. Other ones might be a little bit more. So the more absorbent the paper is, the more it's going to not shimmer. So that is definitely a thing. Same thing works with sheen. Same thing works with shading. Really all the most interesting properties of ink really need to have a less absorbent paper to shine quite literally. And so just be aware of that. It's maybe something that you want to test out before you go full hog on whatever ink color thinking it's going to be the best for you, and then you go to use whatever cards you're using and you're like, this doesn't look anything like it. What's wrong? It could be the paper, okay? So you may want to just get some samples of different things, or you may find that none of them really are great on particular paper, and you may want to choose different cards. I don't know. It's up to you. Depends on what you're going for. Either way, still going to be nice reds to use. All right, I'm going to end on one troubleshooting question here. This is from Curt A on Facebook. I keep seeing complaints about scratchy nibs. It's a term that needs some definition and a discussion of causes, because there cannot be that many terrible nibs out there. What some people see as terrible scratchy nib might just be feedback to others. And of course, there's the whole issue of writing angle and pressure. Well, Curt, you are correct, sir. I think we deal with this all the time here at Goulet Pens. This is a tough one. It is not a universally understood and accepted term. It would certainly be easier if it was. But I think in general, scratchy pretty much means it's not as smooth as I want it to feel, if I had to kind of define what it means in the pen world. Oftentimes, that can just mean a normal and very acceptable amount of feedback. It's very difficult to convey how a nib feels objectively, you know, especially because it varies by person, it varies by pen, by nib, the paper, the ink used, all of these things can affect how smooth a nib feels. So when I was actually researching this question, I went a little bit of a, down a little rabbit trail here. But I'm going to take you on that journey. So yes, I can talk about the things that, all the different factors, writing angle, pressure, all these things, yes. Writing speed, certainly the type of paper. Another thing that can be a factor is the substrate, the surface you're writing on. If you're writing, like my desk has a little bit of a, it's like a faux wood. You can kind of see it back here. It's like this shiny, it's not actual wood, it's like that press board with like a veneer on it. It's got just a slight bit of texture to it, right? So if I have just a single sheet of paper and I'm writing on this, oh man, I get so much more feedback than if I have more of like a full stack of paper or even just another single sheet. But if I have a couple of sheets of paper, it writes so much smoother. So not only the type of paper and all that, but the substrate underneath your paper can be a factor. There's so many factors at play with how smooth a nib can feel. So the reason I kind of went down the rabbit hole I did is I was like, why are there so many different factors? And a lot of it has to do with how sensitive our fingers actually are. And I never really researched it a whole lot. So I went down this rabbit trail and I quickly realized how much I was getting out of my own depths. But I will explore and just show you what I found, and maybe we can go down this road. Anyway, so our fingers are actually quite sensitive. Our fingertips, which is largely when we're holding a pen, that's largely what we're doing. We're holding it with our fingertips, right? So you are actually going to feel how scratchy a pen is and the feedback you feel through the sensitivity of your fingertips, right? So it has to do with the friction that's happening when a pen nib, the tip of that nib is dragging across the page, right? It could have to do with how smooth the tip is ground. It could have to do, again, with the substrate, the type of paper that you're using, writing angle, writing speed, the alignment of the nib tines. It can have to do with the nib material itself, the design of the nib. If it's a softer, springier nib, it's going to be a little more forgiving than a real stiff nail. It can have to do with the pen weight itself. It can have to do with all these things, right? Aside from the fact that it can have to do with, really the most important thing is your own sensitivity of your fingers. If your fingers aren't that sensitive, man, it's not going to feel that scratchy. So I went down this rabbit hole of the sensitivity of fingers, right? And oh my gosh, you can really get scientific if you want to. I did find one article that was sort of like in plain speak enough for me to understand what was going on. So I found this article called A Handy Guide to Touch from Elise Hancock from a Johns Hopkins magazine article that was posted online. And I post a link to it. There's a link on our blog, a blog post for this Q&A, but you can just Google, I guess, Handy Guide to Touch from Elise Hancock. So just a couple of the things that I pulled out of there. The human hand contains over 100,000 nerves, 100,000 nerves in your hand, and 20 different types of nerves that all serve different functions. Some are for temperature, pressure, sensitivity, vibration, both high and low frequency vibration. There's ones for pain, all kinds of various other things. There's ones that are more for, movement of your tendons and these types of things. A lot of stuff going on in your hands. It's amazing. But there's 12 different nerve types that receive touch sensations, right? And I think, based on my very limited scientific knowledge, I think it has to do a lot with the frequency vibrations, right? That's what you're feeling when you're moving a nib across the page. It's actually the vibration that you're feeling when you get feedback of a nib or when you're feeling something being scratchy. The more intense that vibration is, the harsher that feedback is going to feel, right? So I came across kind of a multitude of these scientific studies that, quite frankly, I really didn't comprehend fully. That essentially say kind of the same thing, that our fingertips are actually some of the most sensitive receptors, most sensitive things in kind of the animal world. And it's really amazing, and it's quite complex. So it kind of makes sense that when we have a writing implement that we're holding with some of the most sensitive biological things in the animal world, that we would feel a lot of variety based on all these different factors because it's so highly sensitive, right? If we weren't that sensitive to it, we wouldn't really notice much variation, and like I went down all these different things, like specifically our fingertips, our lips, our tongue also incredibly sensitive, lots of nerves going on there, whereas like the middle of your back, not really that sensitive, right? In fact, I think I read that you have as much sensitivity in your fingertip as you have in your entire torso, right? So it's pretty intense right there going on. That's some of the beauty of that. And there's a lot that has to do with the sensitivity of vibration in our sense of touch, just in general, in life, not just with pens, but that's actually how we feel things. If you think about, like, if you've ever kind of fallen asleep, or been leaning on your arm and it kind of falls asleep, you kind of lose some of the nerve sensitivity. You can still like feel that you're touching something, but you really don't have a lot of confidence or a good sense of what it is that you're touching when those nerve receptors kind of go numb a little bit. It's amazing how different that can feel. And some of that has to do with the vibration aspect of things. Like even just when you touch the surface of a desk, you're actually feeling the vibration of that touch. It's very fascinating. Anyway, there's all kinds of studies. You can go nuts reading articles online if you are so inclined. That's about as much as I kind of understand. So all that to say, it doesn't actually take much for something to feel scratchy, like a pen to feel scratchy, because we're so sensitive in our fingertips. I did not get to research enough whether it's like a high frequency or a low frequency or whatever. Apparently they're different things, and the nerves in our fingers mean different things there. But I imagine that nib scratching is more of a high frequency thing. I don't really know. I didn't read the cutoff. I was trying to understand even the scientific terms for the frequency you feel. It was like V.G or dot or something like that. And I was like, what the heck does that mean? And I just ran out of time researching it. Anyway, science was not like my super strong suit in school. But anyway, so I think the point is that we can, debate about exactly what point a nib feels scratchy, right? Because there is some scientific evidence to measure vibration frequency and sensitivity. There's scientific studies out there to show how sensitive we are to vibration and touch and various things. And it's difficult to really, you kind of really have to be a scientist to study it and really learn it well enough, because again, 20 different varieties of nerves just in your hand, like it's difficult to understand that as like a lay person, right? But anyway, so I do think there is a scientific way to say this is at what point. I could say that this nib, the vibration coming from this nib, feels different from this one in some measurable way. But you would have to control all the variables in such a way that I don't know how meaningful that data would really be, to be quite honest with you. And then even then, when do you define and say something is scratchy versus not scratchy? That is a completely subjective, debatable, line that you would draw. So that aspect of it is not scientific at all. It's purely subjective. Unless we wanted to maybe create some like measurable degree of like the vibration we feel in our hands, and when something crosses to a certain point, that's what we're just going to just call scratchy versus not scratchy. But we don't really have a way to measure that unless we're running like a lab research project. There is definitely no perfectly smooth surface. Like even if you look under high magnification at paper that feels so smooth, when you look at it under high magnification, or you look at a nib under very high magnification, you can see that it's not perfectly smooth. And the more you magnify it, the more you can see that it's not smooth. But it's creating so little friction that when something feels really smooth, it's just getting past the point where our sensitivity is really registering it as something. So that is difficult to say. I'm sure there is some point where something is considered smooth enough where it doesn't register, but even that is going to depend on your own individual sensitivity. I think it just largely has to do with, if we all kind of measured all this and kind of collectively agreed that, okay, at this point of friction, with this so much frequency and intensity, when you're into like sine waves and all this other craziness, we could say that's when it's no longer considered smooth and you're considering it. There's probably some degree of scale. If I really, really, really wanted to, I could probably, pursue this and scientifically come up with some scale that says with all these factors and such frequencies and so on, we could tier it sort of like you have like the Mohs hardness scale or whatever of minerals and various substances. You could probably come up with some tiered scale of smoothness of a nib on a page, and you could come up with various degrees and ratings and stuff like that. The problem is it's going to be so laborious and burdensome to do that. I don't know how that would happen. So all that to say, I do believe that there is a scientific way to measure it. How you do that consistently and in a way that would actually mean something in the real world, I don't know. I would not be qualified to say what that would be. So until then, it's going to remain largely subjective and qualitative to basically be, kind of like, how do you know that food tastes good? How do you know that music sounds good? It's going to vary based on the individual. It's going to vary based. There are scientific elements that can explain what's happening, but it's part art and part science. And that's both the beauty and the curse of fountain pens is that it's so personal. There's so many variables, literally even just to the way that we feel, sensations of writing with the pen. That is a factor in our fountain pen writing experience that is one of many, many, many variables. That's why I love this hobby. That's why there's so much to explore. But all that to say, it does vary a lot, and it's a deep well to tap into if you're trying to explain some of these more specific aspects of it. But anyway, I did find it interesting to explore this. I would love to know what your thoughts are, kind of opening up. I feel like this was like Ark of the Covenant scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where it's like, sensitivity of fingers. Let me explore that. And it was like, and like my face melted off, and like the ghosts or whatever were like all around me. And I was like, okay, cool. Let's close that Ark and like bury it for 1,000 years because I can't handle it. But I did find it interesting anyway. So my question of the week for you all as I wrap up here, on a scale of 1 to 10, so taking something qualitative and making it quantifiable, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the scratchiest nib that you've ever written with, and 10 being the smoothest nib you've ever written with, where would you rate an acceptable level of nib smoothness for your own personal taste? Where's the line? And I would just love to know. So not like where does your pen fall, but just where is your own personal preference? Do you like smoother nibs? Do you like rougher nibs? It varies. I would love to know what's your number between 1 and 10, 1 being scratchy, 10 being smooth. Where are you at? Me personally, I probably prefer something more like an 8 or 9. I like really smooth nibs. But yeah, not so smooth that I'm like completely losing control, but I've rarely used a nib where I'm like, this is too smooth. I like them pretty dang smooth. That's my personal preference. I'd love to know what you think. Go ahead and leave your comments on YouTube. Yeah, and that's what I got for you this week. I hope you all are having a very good December. Yeah, be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching. You can check out a lot of the stuff I talked here about on gouletpens.com. And right on.